takes a long time to write a book, and every author has to pay off that debt somewhere along the line. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tara East. I'm a scholar, writer, YouTuber, blogger, and the author of the mystery novel Every Time He Dies. In this week's video, I want to talk about the 10 things you need to know about plot. Now, if character is the heart of the story, which is what I talked about in my video last week, then plot is the skeleton. Nailing plot can be tricky, and it can often take multiple rewrites to get everything just right. Whether you need help drafting your first ever manuscript, or if you're a seasoned author, then I hope that these 10 tips will help you either through the writing or the revising of your novel. Thing number 1, what happened? Yep, that's plot summed up in 2 words. What happened? Now, some authors figure this out by creating an outline before they start writing, while other writers just throw caution to the wind and get into it, writing the draft from start to beginning or any sort of variation of that. Some writers create an outline before they start writing. How closely or loosely they follow this outline is, of course, totally up to them. And some authors create an outline after they've done the first draft. This way, they can see in a flash, in a bird's eye view, what is actually happening in the novel. Whether you invest this time up front or after the fact, it really doesn't matter. Because the truth is, it takes a really long time to write a book, so whether you invest that time beforehand or after, it doesn't really matter. The thing is, you just need to be investing the time required in order to get the story just right. It takes a long time to write a book, and every author has to pay off that debt somewhere along the line. Thing number 2, structure. Now, there are many ways that you can structure your book. It can be in a linear fashion or a non-linear fashion. One of my favorite anecdotes actually comes from Diana Gabaldon. Now, she doesn't write in a straight line or with an outline. She literally just follows whatever scenes bubble to her mind, and then she stitches the story together after the fact. Now, some authors like to write their book from start to finish in one clean, easy, linear fashion. But the thing I love about these 2 examples is that how you write the book may not be how your book is published. Messing around with how your story could be told is one of the funnest parts of the revision process. And it is worth the time investment of experimenting with all the different orders you could use to tell your story and seeing how a change in order of events could create different effects in your narrative. One of the easiest ways is to write out all of the plots and subplots on post-it notes or index cards, and then you can shuffle them around on the desk or on the floor in order to see which order would actually be the best order for your novel. Thing number 3, stuff just keeps getting worse. The main thing you need to remember about plot is that things need to keep getting worse. Having a character encounter one obstacle which they easily overcome does not a book make. Because the thing is, victory without sacrifice isn't very satisfying. If things get worse, particularly if things get worse because of a decision that the character made, tension increases, and readers will be even more intrigued and even more invested in seeing how your MC and their motley crew figure things out. Thing number 4, the promise. Every story makes a promise, usually at the beginning. As Chekhov said, if there is a gun in Act 1, it must go off by Act 3. The promise can take a backseat to the main plot as we get into the narrative, but at some point you're gonna have to address it and tie everything up in a bow, more or less. If our hero had heart palpitations for the love interest, there better be a kiss in that final scene. If the novel opens with your MC aspiring to leave their tiny hometown, by the end of the novel, they need to have done that, or they need to have found a new sense of purpose which entices them to stay. Thing number 5, character-driven. The best plots are those that are driven by the characters. Now, what exactly does that mean? Character-driven means that the characters again have agency, that their decisions and their actions are informing the plot and making stuff happen, rather than the character passively waiting around for the almighty narrator to drop things on them for them to respond to. I mean, just think about it. No one likes hanging out with that boring kid who's constantly complaining about being boring. No, we want to be with those restless rebels who are out there raising hell because they're ready to do something. Thing number 6. Don't add dummy obstacles. The thing about dummy obstacles is that they can be spotted a mile away. Have you ever read a chapter or a scene or a book where you kind of got to the end of it and you were like, I really don't understand why that had to happen? Dummy obstacles are a sign of a seriously amateur writer, and this tactic should be avoided at all costs. It is much better to have a short, sharp, tight, potent story than one that kind of just waffles on aimlessly because you wanted to publish a big book. If you've written your novel, you've included all of the obstacles you could initially think of, and it feels a little bit short still, I challenge you to sit down with a pad and pen. Please do not do this on your computer. We want all of the cognitive ability of your brain engaged here. So sit down with a pad and pen and try and write out 50 different obstacles the protagonist could encounter. Then you can go through all of these options, pick out the ones that are the most relevant to your story and the most believable, and have a crack at trying to include them. If this doesn't work, then you might just need to accept that this actually is a short novel, or you can work it into a novella length or even a short story, depending on what you're working with. My number one tip here is that it's better to be short and good rather than long and bad. That's what she said. Thing number 7, light and dark. I'm sure you already know that a good novel has lots of variation in it because this is what keeps things interesting. A plot that is all action is just as bad as a plot that is full of internal ruminations. We want to see action, story beats, things happening, as much as we want to see deep exchanges between characters, as well as poignant moments and internal reflections. You wouldn't buy a car unless it had an accelerator and a brake. If it only has the brake, you're going nowhere fast. And if it only has the accelerator, you're going to be going head on into a brick wall. Thing number 8, subplots. Subplots, just like light and dark, add more nuance, intrigue, and additional layers to your novel. Nobody has one thing going on in their life. We all have multiple responsibilities and concerns that we're trying to deal with and that we're constantly juggling. Let's say you're working on a crime novel, so the main plot is solving the crime, but we also need to see other elements, other aspects of that character, the protagonist's life. Does your MC have a romantic love interest? Maybe they've got a few family problems happening. Maybe they hate everybody that they work with. Subplots help flesh out a character, and they really mix up the plot so that the whole book isn't simply about just one thing. One of the best things you can do is to construct subplots that then inform the main plot. And if you can pull this one off, your book will be even more exciting to read. Thing number 9, microplots. Microplots, as the name suggests, are the teeny tiny little plots that are involved in your novel. So they could be a single event or a single sequence. This microplot could be a romantic exchange between two secondary characters. And the reason why you would include this is because it shows that the secondary character has a life away and separate from the MC. It makes them seem more real. Of course, your microplot could also be a little sneak peek into some other aspect of your MC that is sort of to the side or away from the central plot. Now, you don't need to include many microplots in your novel because when this happens, you'll again have that sort of waffly sense and feeling to it. But how you should use microplots is a way to reveal further character and to make the story feel more full as a whole. Thing number 10, descriptions, info dumps, and other bad manners. It takes a level of discernment to figure out how much detail you need to provide in order for the reader to actually see the scene and to understand what is happening. And what makes this particularly tricky is that our own preferences for how much description we enjoy reading or writing may differ from the readers who buy our books, and it could even differ from the expectations of the genre that we're writing in. For example, science fiction and fantasy novels, because there's so much world building, we expect there to be a learning curve at the start of the novel because we're learning so much about the world, how it functions, the politics, the environment, and so on. Because the world is unfamiliar to us, we need to provide a lot of description. So in this case, it totally makes sense. But, for example, if you have characters walking onto an aeroplane, you really don't need to spend much time describing the airplane because we all know what that looks like. If you're working on your novel and you're really not sure if you're adding enough description or if you're adding too much description, one of the things you can do is to solicit some beta readers. You can then let their critiques guide you through the revision process as you decide how much description you need to include. All of this advice also applies to info dumps. Just before, I mentioned how descriptions can be quite lengthy in science fiction and fantasy, and this genre is also very prone to info dumps because, again, we're learning about this unfamiliar world. The trick here is that you need to figure out a way to feed out the information to your reader as they need to know it. That way, you're not providing like 3 pages of really intense, dull, boring description explaining how the world works. This is where you really need to show instead of tell and make sure that everything you're writing feels convincing and not very heavy-handed. Well, there you have it, guys. Those are my 10 things about plot. Now, I'd love to hear from you. How do you deal with plot when you're writing your fiction, and what's your approach to plot, either during the drafting or the revising stage? Please leave a comment below because I'd love to hear all about it. Now, if you'd like even more writing advice, you can head to taraeast.com. If you're looking for something to read, might I suggest my novel, Every Time He Dies. You can even find the first 3 chapters for free on my website. You can also find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, along with the rest of the world. Thank you so much for watching again, guys. I really appreciate that you show up here every week. I hope you're having a fantastic week and that you're getting a lot of writing done. And I'll see you next time.